Hey there, thanks for tuning into Duckbricks. I'm Chris, and we almost got this as an official LEGO Bionicle set in 2023. So what's the story behind this? Well, this was a concept proposed for the LEGO Bionicle gift with purchase set, which of course eventually ended up being Tahu and Takua as a buildable figure, but we almost came very close to getting a much more articulatable, posable figure with a working gearbox. So what exactly happened? Well, now let's dive into the history and backstory behind this model, and huge shout out to the incredibly talented folks who reverse engineered how to make this from just a couple of images that we got a chance to see during the development of Tahu and Takua, the actual GWP that we did eventually end up getting. While I am really happy with this as the final GWP and feel like Tahu is a very good representation of Bionicle to get for this actual gift, I think it's really cool to actually take a look at what could have been and see an example of what Bionicle might actually look like as a system-oriented theme. And so, let's dive into this episode of Bionicle Fanon Reviews, the GWP that never was. Okay, so this is the System Takanuva. This was originally considered to be a gift with purchase before they decided to go the route of the Tahu and Takua. It probably would have been at a very similar price threshold, and the only reason why this one is a little bit more built up compared to the Tahu that we got is because it is primarily focused on using all of the parts in the model to just depict Takanuva. No side builds, no anything else, and depicts an interesting alternate future in terms of what System Bionicle could actually look like. Now this is a really interesting topic I wanted to dive into for the video, and I do want to give a big thank you to a ton of folks on Discord who were able to actually reverse engineer this model just by looking at one single photo of it front face on. And I will say, obviously there probably are going to be some inaccuracies compared to what we actually potentially would have gotten because we are basing things off of one single photo, but as far as my knowledge, this is the closest that you can get to actually being able to replicate the exact model that we saw in those original images, which were provided to us by the LEGO Ambassador Network back when they were first launching the Tahu and Takua set. Of course, near the end of the video, much like all of the other Bionicle Fanon reviews, we'll be bringing alongside the actual Takanuva to do some direct comparisons between one model and the other, and posit a few thoughts as to could Bionicle G3 come back like this in system form, and what would be the pros and cons. Now let's start off first by taking a look at the model itself. Compared to the original Takanuva, this actually has quite a lot more articulation. As you can see, starting off with the legs, you can move the legs on standard ball joints, which is pretty much to be expected with something like this, but you can actually have a very slight bend in the knees. It's not as much of a bend as you might think it is because unfortunately the way that the knee joints are set up, they're just on the click hinges here, so you can't really bend it past a certain point, but I do appreciate the effort, and I definitely do feel like the pieces do approximate somewhat the original pieces that we did get. The feet are mounted on ball joints, so you can move those back and forth like so, and that's quite nice. And then when you get to the arms themselves, you actually have the possibility to really bend the arms. And one thing I really appreciate is that the way that they were able to accomplish the arm joint was by actually making it somewhat triple jointed, where in this case you can really bend the arms all the way up if you want to, just by having the joints move like that. It's a really clever way to give it a little bit of extra articulation, and it's not something that LEGO typically does with buildable action figures or mechs like this. The only other example I can immediately think of being in the upcoming Cole's Titan Dragon mech from Ninjago, which in my opinion is a really good set that every Bionicle fan should really check out. Of course, the hands themselves can be moved around on the ball joint itself. The head is mounted on a mini ball joint, aka a mixel joint, so you can move that, look back and forth. You can adjust the armor pieces up and down, although they are a little bit finicky and they do tend to fall off. And what's the best part about this is that yes, this has a gear function, where you literally have a gearbox built into the model itself, allowing you to swing the arms back and forth much like the original model, which is something I was really impressed by. And even just by looking at initial photos of the model itself, it wasn't even obvious to me there was a gearbox until I actually built it myself. Articulation-wise, it's actually looking pretty good. But the big question is, does something like this capture the spirit of Bionicle? And to me, something that makes a Bionicle Bionicle is the exclusive collectible mask. There has to be at least one exclusive piece, and obviously, it doesn't make sense for a gift with purchase to receive a new mold. In fact, I can't remember the last time a GWP ever got a new mold, much less a new print, and we actually did have an increased budget for the Tahu and Takua, which did get 2 new prints. So clearly they had the budget to print something, which is why they actually crudely hand drew the mask on with Sharpie. Obviously that would have looked a lot better for the final product, but what I tried to do was keep it as close to the prototype model as possible. I know some people online have actually gone ahead and done the graphic design of what it could look like with modern LEGO printing techniques, but honestly, I kind of like the simple charm of having it just be hand drawn on, and it does actually kind of look like the Evoke. I'm curious how they would have been able to get it to look right, especially with the mouthpiece being used right here, but overall I am pretty happy with the design of the head. I actually really like how it kind of looks like the original Metru head, which I know isn't quite right for a model like this, but as you can see, they actually have the circular elements on the front of the head, which look really good, and then you also have the eye stalk in the back, kind of just in the middle of the bricks there, so all of that is actually done really well, and I feel like the head is sculpted quite nicely. However, it just can't replace a mask, and I feel like if Bionicle were to come back in system form, I really feel like there should at least be a mask included in each set that is unique to really make it feel separate out. And obviously there are a lot of people that fall into the camp of, well, if it's not fully Technic-based and if it's not fully using random new pieces and new molds for the arms and the legs, well then we don't want it and it's not Bionicle. And to those I say, I don't necessarily disagree. I always definitely feel like it was always very special to get brand new molds for Bionicle stuff when it was coming out, but the unfortunate reality of the day that we live in is that LEGO has long shifted the way they operate as a company. It's very rare for a single set to get a brand new dedicated mold, and even if it does, either it's necessitated by a license holder or the mold is spread across multiple sets in a wave. Even Ninjago, a total juggernaut of a theme and one of the most profitable original LEGO themes, only really gets a few new molds per actual quarter of set releases, and those are spread out across multiple sets. It's super rare to find a mold that only exists in one single set. And because of that, I don't really think it's feasible for LEGO to ever bring back something like CCBS or G1 or anything along those lines, because it's just not how they operate as a company anymore. And the reality is, if we were to get Bionicle nowadays, it probably would look something like this. But this, in my opinion, is not actually that bad. Despite it being primarily built out of system, there are a lot of good Technic elements being utilized to actually give you the gear function. I really do love the amount of detail that you're able to angle each and every one of the individual pieces on the sides of the arms themselves. You can really curl up the arms, articulate them in the way that you want them to, and what's really nice is one of my favorite things about this model in particular is that the way the pistons were done on the inner leg torso. So as you can see here, the inner torso has the candlestick pieces being kind of wedged inwards with some different piston-like elements being used to make it feel a bit more mechanical. All of it is just done using existing system elements, but I actually really like the way they were able to get this done. And it really does feel like this is somewhat mechanical in its design because you do have a semblance of pistons being built in. The same goes for these little bits on the ends of the arms. Almost feels like as you bend the arm more further this way, you can actually have that be a piston that's moving back and forth, and that's something I really do appreciate. And all in all, there were a lot of attempts to make this feel more like a Bionicle, especially compared to standard system mech builds. This is a lot more refined, it's a lot more articulatable, there's a lot more going on here than your average system mech, and I really do appreciate just how much thought and love went into crafting this. And while I do think the ultimate right choice was made, Tahu and Takua was incredibly charming, and while it was a little bit more restricted in articulation, it made up for it by actually having Takua and a little bit of a surfing platform attached as well. This is a very, very interesting concept for what brick-built Brickonicle could look like today. And the only thing I'm not super convinced by is the weapon. The weapon being this transparent, clear garage door element is clearly a result of them just trying to come up with something interesting. Realistically, it probably would have been represented by one of those larger Ninjago blades, and LEGO does mold the large-scale blades still to this day for Ninjago, so I could have seen them doing that. It is an interesting weapon for a Toa of Light to use a transparent sword, and I think if it was just a more interesting shape than clearly a garage door element, it could have been a little bit cooler, but as it is right now, I'm not super convinced by the weapon. Still, that being said, I was a lot happier with this than I thought I would be, especially because it is just a system brick-built representation of what could have been. But the real question is, how does it stack up compared to the original model? And so here we have the OG Takanuva, who obviously for its time introduced a lot of new molds, and it's hard to compare against the new molds. But the one thing I find interesting is that the gold on the new Takanuva, using the drum lacquered gold elements, is actually, in my opinion, a lot nicer than the flat dark gold that they had back in 2003. Flat dark gold always worked for certain characters that had armor that felt older, maybe characters that feel like they've been around for a while, whose shiny gold armor is now a little bit more dull and weathered with age, and I feel like that never really worked for Takanuva, where clearly if they had drum lacquered gold or even pearl gold back then, I'm sure they would have used it, because every image that he's depicted by has the armor digitally made shinier than it actually is. So color scheme wise, I actually really do like the newer one, and just how much more detail it's able to pack in. As you can see, you have all of these different bits of light gray and dark gray and black being integrated into the color scheme, which just makes it feel a lot more alive, and it feels like there's a lot more going on with the mechanical detail of this model as compared to this one. But of course, it is hard to beat that Bionicle charm. And obviously, while he does have pretty much the same exact gear function, there is just something about the original model that feels just a little bit more special, and feels like it is very custom made and tailor made to depicting this actual character. This is going to always hold a special place in my heart, but honestly, I wouldn't be too sad if they were to do something like this just with custom masks and maybe custom weapons. It's not everyone's cup of tea, and I'm sure there's a ton of commenters right now rushing to say that this looks awful and that why would LEGO ever do something like this? And honestly, I feel like it definitely is just a personal choice. I know that when images of this first came out, there was a lot of controversy because I loved this, and I said I kind of wish we got something like this instead of what we got, but other members of the Bionicle community absolutely were against this, and they really hated this and said it doesn't look anything like what it should, and they're very happy that we got what we eventually got. And while I'm happy either way, I definitely feel like I'm probably in the camp that likes something like this the most and would be more open to seeing it as a Bionicle reboot. Now that being said, there's a lot more that goes into bringing back Bionicle, and frankly, it's not a good financial choice for LEGO to ever bring it back at this point, because retailers won't want to stock it, especially after how poorly, abysmally so, that G2 did. No retailer is ever going to want to stock Bionicle again. And so right now it is just a pipe dream to have Bionicle brought back in system form, but you know what? A man can dream, and it is really cool seeing that LEGO designers in the company are cooking up stuff like this as a possibility of something they could maybe release down the line. That's all for this quick look at the Bionicle system Takanuva that never was to be, and I'm very, very curious. I expect the comments section to be very polarizing. I'm sure there will be people in camps that really hate this and say this is awful and LEGO should never do this. And I'm sure there'll be other people in camps that say this is actually pretty good, and maybe people that wish that we got this over the Tahu and Takua that we eventually got. As far as I can tell, I really don't know which way the conversation's gonna go, which is why I really wanted to cover this in a video, do some direct comparisons, and I hope you enjoyed this special edition of Bionicle Fanon Reviews. I'll talk to you again very soon. Alright, and with that we have summed up our look at this GWP that never was, Takanuva, the Toe of Light, built out of pretty much exclusively system pieces with a little bit of Technic smattered in for the gear function. Let me know in the comments what you think of this as what Bionicle actually could be. Again, something like this was designed by a LEGO designer, so if we were to get Bionicle today, this is probably the closest to what it could look like, given how LEGO doesn't really produce any specialized construction pieces anymore. Of course, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I hope you enjoyed this look at a very interesting oddity of what could have been in LEGO history. Thanks for tuning in, and bye for now.